Hello everyone, I'm Gary York, CorruptionBehindBars.com. Thank you for watching my YouTube channel. And today I want to discuss why corruption in prison is a two-way street. Yes, I've done videos on officers that have gone corrupt. I've also done a lot of training videos to try to help our officers, and I've used actual officers that I know to help me do these training videos who are very well experienced. But today I want to talk about the other side of the coin. You know, corruption in prison is not just from the few bad apples that wear a uniform or work in a prison that taint the image of the good, honest correctional officers. Corruption continues when the inmates or some of the inmates come to prison. Some inmates come to prison and do their time and go home. No problems, no issues. But then we have the inmates who continue the corruption behind the walls of the prison. And today I'm going to talk about the brutal attacks on correctional officers by inmates. And I have done many hundreds of investigations along with my colleagues in the Florida prison system on attacks by inmates on correctional officers. And we fought tooth and nail with the state attorney in every county where we had an incident to please press charges. And most of the state attorney's offices, 99.9%, had no problem at all filing criminal charges on an inmate who assaulted an officer, and thank goodness for that. Just wanted to tell you also, we have probation and parole officers in every state, and they take some hits too, because remember, these inmates, many of them leave the prison and go back to probation and parole to serve some time on probation and parole, and end up assaulting probation officers. So let me start with the probation officer side first, and yes, I'm going to read it. This is from a danger statistics study done by a professor and in conjunction with law enforcement training personnel. And it is estimated that 1 out of every 5 probation officers will be assaulted during their career. 70% of the suspects convicted of attacking a police officer or a correctional officer were on probation and parole at one time or another, either while they were on the street and attacked a police officer, or had been on probation and went to prison before they attacked the correctional officer. So the probation officers are dealing with the same folks we deal with in the prison. And we have to remember, I was a probation officer at one time. In my career in Florida, I was a probation officer before I was a prison inspector, and I was a correctional officer before that in a state prison. And one of the most common statements heard from probation and parole officers is, "I know my offenders. I can't get hurt." You would think you wouldn't hear that statement, but there are people who make that statement, and you don't know your offenders. You never know what they're going to do. And once these offenders get to prison, it doesn't stop there. In 2003 at Charlotte Correctional Institution, we lost correctional officer Darla Latham, killed after a failed escape attempt of 5 inmates on a work squad, an interior work squad, an inside work squad, that she was supervising, and the inmates used tools to kill her, and the escape failed, and in the end there was a homicide investigation, and these inmates were sentenced to death. The ones that 3, I believe, out of the 5 were sentenced to death. Anyway, this does not help the fact that she is not with us anymore, and that these brutal attacks and killings on officers exist. That was in 2003. In 2017, we lost Lieutenant Stephen Floyd, Sr., who was killed by inmates in a hostage situation in a Delaware prison, and it was also ruled a homicide. So that's just 2003 to 2017, and things haven't changed, and something has to be done about it. We have inmates that officers are being escorted, or that officers are escorting from their cell to to the medical unit, from their inmate cell to the shower. They may be handcuffed, and once the officers get to the location, and remember, the officers are doing nothing to these inmates except taking them for personal hygiene, taking them for medical care, or maybe taking them for their recreation time. All things that are good for the inmates. And there's thousands of incidents where the officers take the handcuffs off of the inmate, and the inmate brutally attacks the officer. For what? For what? It's terrible what is going on, and the officers seem to just have to put up with this and wait for weeks and months and sometimes over a year before something happens in the courts, by the time the case is investigated and gets through the court system. And one thing that is happening in the state of Pennsylvania, we have a Representative Carl Metzger who is trying to get some new laws passed by legislature in Pennsylvania for tougher sentencing on inmates who attack officers. He is also trying to get privileges taken away from inmates who attack officers. He's wanting these sentences to go at the end of their sentence that they're presently serving, and so that way we know for sure that they serve more time for the crime. And Florida legislature, are you listening? I hope so. I hope the other states listen. We're not trying to be housing inmates for the rest of their lives. Okay, for all you people out there that go, they just want to get the inmates and keep the inmates longer. Please, if somebody assaults you on the street, breaks into your home and beats you, I think you're going to be calling for help, and I think you're going to damn well tell the state attorney you better press charges and you better put this person in prison. So it's the same thing for a correctional officer. If an officer is attacked, beaten, you're darn well right we want them to get new charges. We want them to serve more time. Okay? It's one thing if the inmate is being abused and he's trying to defend himself. But thousands and thousands of cases aren't this way. Thousands and thousands of cases are the inmates are jumping correctional officer staff for no reason. Let's don't just talk about the uniform. I've investigated cases where nurses have tried to administer medication to inmates, and they've jumped up and hit them with a closed fist, a male inmate hitting a nurse with a closed fist, beating an inmate. I've investigated cases where nurses have set the medication through the food slot, on the food slot door for the inmate to take, and while her hand is on the food slot, the inmate reaches out with a razor blade that he'd confiscated and hidden and sliced the nurse's hand with it. These are people trying to help these inmates. So there's a lot of people out in the free world that think it's all the officers. Well, you've got to please try to walk down the middle like a prison inspector. We have to walk down the middle, and wherever the evidence falls, it falls. But you can't just think one-sided. It is not the officers starting these fights with the inmates. 90% or more are the inmates without reason or cause jumping on the officers and brutalizing the officers. That's corruption. That's criminals coming to prison that don't want to change. So you can bring in all the services you want. You can pray with them. You can try to teach them. And believe me, there are inmates that don't want to change and will not change. And there are a lot of inmates that will change. And they will get out of prison. And they will stay out of prison. But why does everybody have to think that it's not the inmate's fault for everything? Please, come on. How in the heck did they end up in prison? We didn't go out there and just pick John Doe and say, come on, today you're going to prison. We don't do that. People have to do something to commit some type of alleged crime to be arrested, and then they have to go through the court system, be proven guilty, and they have a right to a jury trial. They've either pled and went to prison, or they've either been found guilty by a jury. And many of them can come out and make it and change their lives. And I know people. I personally have friends who have either been in jail or prison, and they haven't seen one for decades. Why? Because they accepted what they did as being wrong. They did their time. They harmed no one while they were in prison or jail, and they got out and they changed their life. But we do have criminals who won't change. They'll continue to brutally attack officers. May all our fallen officers rest in peace. May we pray for their families. God bless. And for those of you who only want to hear about corruption from a prison employee, well, I want to do a few videos coming up over the next few weeks about the opposite side. We have to know that there's two sides to every story, two sides to each coin, and corruption is a two-way street. Thank you for watching Corruption Behind Bars. And please, if you like this video, subscribe to my YouTube. We also have some training videos on here, and I'll do some more in the future. I have some plans to get with some more correctional officers to assist me with some good training videos. And thank you very much. Have a great week.